everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. yet again. And we have on our show with us today a big fan favorite here at the Deep Dive, and that is Tony Shaffer, president of Project Sentinel and host of the podcast, The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer. Tony, welcome to the show. And just let me say welcome to the new year. And I hope your new year was good.
Happy New Year, Danny. Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, it's not bad. It's good. By the way, I got to say your theme music. I always feel like going out and hunting armadillo in Texas every time I hear it. It's got that Texas. I just like, man, I want to be in Texas right now. I don't know why. It just drives me that way. So.
Well, I'm from Texas, so that's music to my ears. So I'm glad to hear it.
Well, Happy New Year. Good to be here.
That's good. Well, you know what? I mean, man, ordinarily you think the new year, you want to talk about optimism and positive things. And man, we just don't seem to have a lot of, good material for that today. We're going to talk about some things and I wanted to get a kind of your view of where some things are going here. We want to look at like the 30,000 foot view today. We often talk about the tactical situation in various wars, but we want to look really globally today. And we're going to kind of take a survey of different parts of the world and get a view from you where you think, as this year just opens up, where things might stand at the end of the year, or at least what big direction things are going in. And of course, probably makes sense that we want to start in the Russia-Ukraine war, since that's, nearing its 2-year mark just next month. It's going to come up. And just to kind of set the stage, as we often do here, I want to look at what both the leaders of both Russia and Ukraine are saying as we enter the new year. Then look at what a certain American general is saying, and then we'll take it from there. So first of all, here's what Zelensky said on New Year's Eve.
I thank all our partners for the fact that this year we already have Patriots, Iris-T, HIMARS, NASAMS, Hawk, Abrams, Leopards and many more. And our pilots are already mastering F-16 jets, and we will be definitely seeing them in our skies, so that our enemy can certainly see what our real wrath is. And next year the enemy will feel the wrath of domestic production, our weapons, our equipment, artillery, our shells, our drones, our naval greetings to the enemy, and at least 1 million Ukrainian FPV drones.
If wars were only fought on the TV screens, I think Ukraine would be doing a lot better than they are. But they're not the only ones on this. Vladimir Putin had some things to say also toward the end of the year, and I think when you look at things, he seems to be coming at this with a little bit of confidence.
Мы достигнем своих целей, о которых вы сказали. Теперь вернемся к этим целям. Они не меняются. Вот я напомню, о чем мы тогда говорили. О денацификации Украины, о демилитаризации, о ее нейтральном статусе. Теперь, что касается демилитаризации. Не хотят договариваться. Что ж, мы тогда вынуждены принимать другие, в том числе военные меры.
Now, Zelensky didn't talk about it, but their 2023 was almost completely unsuccessful at everything they tried offensively or to hold big cities like Bakhmut, et cetera. It was a pretty bad year for them, which you didn't hear anything in his comments there. But then you had a retired American General Hodges, who did at least tacitly acknowledge it, but said it really wasn't Ukraine's fault. It was, well, I'll just let him talk for himself.
No, two things. First of all, Ukraine has not failed. I think we in the West have failed. We failed to commit strategically to Ukraine winning, and therefore we have failed to deliver those capabilities that Ukraine needs and has expected that would enable the counteroffensive to be successful.
So Hodges is saying, yeah, it was because we didn't give enough, and he specifies later on enough ATACMS missiles, Storm Shadows. If we just had a few more missiles to give to them, man, everything would have been different, and it will head into the new year. Now, you have Zelensky has just recently, and his Zaluzhny, his commander of the armed forces, has just said they're going to mobilize somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 additional troops. Russia is saying that they're ramping up production. You saw in Zelensky's little clip there that he says they're also going to start ramping up production. But the problem is some of those things that he's talking about aren't even off the paper yet. They haven't even gotten contracts signed, much less anything bid. It'll be 2025, 2026 before you see a lot of practical results of that. But on the Russian side, they started about a year ago, actually even longer than that. And now then they are already in the mass production capability for a lot of things. And as we've seen in just the last 48 hours, their missile and drone inventories are already quite high on this operational level. And I'm just not sure that Ukraine is going to be able to hold on too much longer. At least that's what it looks like to me. Where do you see this war going as we enter 2024?
Well, I think the answer is embedded in what you just showed. Zelensky is a master of the face. He is the face of the neocon, the collaboration of the EU neocons and the Biden administration. It all kind of, it's like a watercolor. It all just kind of merges together. It's all kind of a conglomeration. And Zelensky is reflecting the aspirations. And we all know, Danny, that over this past year, the aspirational thinking and attitude of everybody I just mentioned, EU, the Biden administration, Zelensky, it's the equivalent of magical thinking. It's like there's a great Far Side cartoon where there's scientists working on a big equation on a chalkboard, and then there's like a gap, and they write in there, here a miracle happens. Well, that's what they're looking for. I swear to God, no, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, here a miracle. Wow. Well, there's no miracle. There's no miracle. So, but the way I think everybody in the audience should pay very close attention to the presentations you just showed. Zelensky, as a matter of fact, Zelensky has been all about trying to authorize very aggressive military operations and actions, such as the attack on the Russian ship in Crimea, the use of Storm Shadow missiles against that Russian city. What's the name?
Belgorod.
Belgorod. Those are all meant to show the West, hey, I'm capable of winning. That's why he's doing it. And I think he's taking on some risk that he shouldn't. I don't think the Russians are going to play his game. The Russians aren't going to come back and hit civilian targets like the Ukrainians did regarding Belgorod. And the other thing, to your point, Russia has developed whole new classes of weapons, some of which have not even been used in combat yet. I mean, these things are just rolling off the assembly line. So they continue to build up. They've been very gradual, very deliberate. And everybody else has been kind of sporadic.
Yet. I may not be familiar with that.
There's a new class of hypersonic missile, which I was just listening about, that they've just literally come up with, kind of finalized, and is gone into production. I can't remember the name off my top of my head. I didn't get a chance to write it down this morning when I was doing some prep, but it's coming. I think it's on the Durand. You can check those guys out. They always reference you, Danny, by the way.
Oh,
just saying. So anyway, so there's evidence that the Russians are on the march, literally, and not much that can be done to stop it. But the other thing, note this. You mentioned you had Vladimir Putin do his Christmas message. And I think the one word description, strength. He showed strength. On the other hand, we had a guy named Joe Biden in St. Croix with his wife, who was displaying the dollar store under $1 Christmas decorations, which were available on her dress. It was quite the sight. I think Dollar General got quite the boost, by the way. If you want to find really grand Christmas decorations under $1, just look at Jill Biden's outfit. It's great. And so you juxtapose, can't even talk today, juxtapose Joe Biden and Jill Biden with dollar store tchotchkes and Putin in a very serious laying out policy is kind of the two extremes of the current conflict. And by the way, Putin's very clear that he feels the West is now his enemy. Well, I don't include Joe Biden for what it's worth, but that's the problem. You have a complete disconnect between what the Russians speak, act, and intend versus what the West is pretending they're doing and hoping for the best.
Yeah, that magical thinking, that term you keep using, it's just troubling that it just continues to perpetuate. And I mean, Hodges is one of them, but he's definitely not the only one. There's a bunch of them.
And Danny, think about this: $113 billion. I could have taken all of China and most of Japan with that money if they told me to go do something with it. I swear to God. Like, I know, no problem. I'll have a victory in about 18 months. I'll let you know when we're done.
Yeah, and I've obviously from the outset have said, it's America's most important interest to keep this war from expanding. The last thing we need is any kind of an unnecessary war, of course, obviously with a nuclear powered Russia. But in the way that we've done this, it's just painful to watch because. I mean, as I mentioned here a few times, when you look at the roll up that the State Department puts out of everything that we've given them, it's over 5,000 military vehicles of all different
Right.
types, millions of rounds of everything. But the way that we provided that stuff was incrementally and a little bit here, a little bit there, wait 6 months and a little bit more here. I mean, if you'd have just said, all right, we're going to give that stuff here, at least they would have had a shot to do more than they did. But the way we just drug it out and just let one piece go in here, and now allegedly, a half a dozen or a dozen F-16s next year, like that's going to change anything. These things just made it even less likely that they're going to succeed. And the problem with that gets back into a version of the magical thinking you're talking about, and that's almost the absence of understanding of how you build combat power. And it's just like they're just tossing out some categories. I don't know, tchotchkes, if you want to look at it from that perspective. They don't understand how you need to put these things together and how you mass effects to get combat outcomes. And it troubles me that it doesn't seem like their senior government leaders get that.
So there are historic references to successful applications of massive and overwhelming combat power. I have to do a talk. I mentioned on our pre-talk. I have to do a talk at the local Legion tonight, and I'm going through 8 military leaders of note that I think are significant and should be discussed. One of them is Eisenhower. Eisenhower was an effectively, an overwhelmingly effective leader in that he understood how to mass combat power, how to pick deputies, and put together an effective fighting force that would hit near simultaneously at the time of his choosing, and effectively so. He did. D-Day, June 6, 1944. Several movies about it. I recommend all of them. So that is the effective use of combat power. And by the way, diplomacy. He was a diplomat as much as a logistician. And then, so I think that's a guy. Norman Schwarzkopf, General Schwarzkopf.
Yeah.
Another guy who understood how to array effectively multiple nations' combat power and effectively apply it, and use the full spectrum of the arts of war, everything from strategic deception to the overwhelming use of new technologies, such as stealth technology and things like that. He was a master of his domain.
And Tony, what really stood out to me in a negative way, you may remember, I believe at the 1st of December, the Washington Post published a 2-part story about why the Ukraine offensive failed in the summer, spring and summer. And the thing that really jumped out to me there is that many of the senior Pentagon officials that they talked to actually thought there was a 50-50 shot that they would get down to the Azov coast, even though they knew they had no air power to speak of, insufficient air defense, only a scratch of mine clearing weapons, and a dearth of artillery shells. And I can't imagine how you would think there was any chance, much less a 50-50 shot.
No, because we have politicians in uniform. That's what we have. There are no generals of the old school there left. And I know, you and I've known a few. I still know a few who I think you could bring back in and actually assign them. They would be near Schwarzkopf, if not better than Schwarzkopf quality. But that's the problem. They're generals, not politicians. I've known a number of generals. One of them, I don't want to mention my name to embarrass him, because I told him once, I said, "Man, you were hard to get a hold of." He says, "Well, I can do one of two things, Tony. I can either do my job and run the Department of Defense, or I can go to parties constantly in Washington and be a politician." And you probably know what I'm talking about. And he was dead serious when he said it. You never saw him at all these parties. So I'm just saying that there are guys. There's some really outstanding women general too that I've worked with. I think that they understand what we would say. I don't necessarily think they have the depth of combat experience that would be necessary, but I would give it to anybody who want to take a shot at actually organizing the military around specific military objectives, which are achievable and within the context of a certain set of objectives that are assigned, versus someone who literally will sit on the sidelines, look at the maps, and say, "Oh yeah, there's a chance. we can hope for the best. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, that farsighted thing there. Insert miracle here. I think that
That's
they're
right.
like, yeah, that'll work. That's just
There a
throw
miracle
that in
happens.
there.
That's right.
Well, we'll
Yeah.
figure it out when we get there. Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's go to the Israel-Hamas war here.
Yeah.
Now, not going to look so much at the tactics or what's going on, but look at some of the fundamentals. Actually, look as much at the political aspect of this as anything else to see where this might go, because some of the politics and things off the battlefield may have more influence on how this thing turns out than even what happens on the battlefield. And I want to start off looking, because something's just in the news here recently, that there's been a ruling from the Supreme Court of Israel, which ironically could have some impact on how this war is fought. So first of all, let me show you just a brief clip for those who may not know what all this was about. A lot of this started actually last summer.
Israel's Supreme Court on Monday struck down a highly disputed law that limited court oversight passed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing government. The law was part of a broader judicial overhaul proposed by Netanyahu and his coalition of religious and nationalist partners. It sparked months of nationwide protests and caused a deep rift in Israel and concern over the country's democratic principles among Western allies. The law took away the court's ability to void such decisions that it deemed unreasonable. 8 of the 15 justices ruled to nullify this law, which the court said, quote, causes severe and unprecedented harm to the core characteristics of Israel as a democratic state.
Now, as you can see from that clip right there, this was something that was very, very divisive among the Israeli civilians. In fact, only the war is what stopped a lot of those protests. They were still going on even into October, because there was so much division between the right and the left in Israel over the judicial review, which basically Netanyahu was wanting to weaken the judicial branch so that they would have more power, et cetera. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that, but the issue is it's very divisive. Now that the Supreme Court has cut down Netanyahu's law, you had on Sky News one of his ambassadors going on, and when he was asked point blank, will the government follow the Supreme Court? Well, watch this.
Hamas didn't ask people if they were for or against judicial reform. They didn't ask people, are you for Mr. Netanyahu? Are you against Mr. Netanyahu? They didn't ask you, are you of the left or the right? Are you religious? Are you secular? They murdered brutally everyone they came across. And I think it's important we remember that, and it's crucial that we win this war against Hamas, as we will.
Is he going to abide by the Supreme Court's decision?
Once again, we're now focusing on winning this war. It's not on the agenda of the government. The Justice Minister has said so, that we will not deal with these issues. This is a time for national unity. The issue was very divisive, as you will recall. We're focusing now on winning this war. That's the only priority we have today.
If he decides that he doesn't want to accept what the Supreme Court has said, then the military, police, could be forced to decide whose rule of law they want to obey.
I just don't think that's on the agenda at all today, Kay.
So that's going to stay very divisive within Israel. But there is an additional problem that could cause for Israel on the other side of the pond in the West, because there are many in the United States and in Western Europe, but in particular, we want to look at the U.S., especially of the younger generation, that are turning against Israel as they see a lot of these casualties rise. And they see things like this. Now, that guy didn't want to talk about the judicial review or the democratic process of obeying the rule of law. But there's many in the U.S. that are seeing that, and they're saying, yeah, you're not that democratic. And here's the result of that domestically for Biden.
The 23-year-old was part of the surge in young voters in the liberal Dane County that helped Biden flip the battleground state 3 years ago. He's now angry at the president over his support for Israel's invasion of Gaza.
He is allowing this war to happen and is funding this war. I don't know what will happen if I don't vote for him, but I know it won't be me supporting that.
In 2020, Election Day exit polls showed young voters backed Biden over Donald Trump by more than 20 points. But a recent NBC News poll shows former President Trump leading this group by 4 percentage points, and President Biden at risk of losing a key part of his winning coalition.
Do you plan on voting for him in November?
I don't know.
60% of young voters say they oppose more funding and military aid to Israel.
Now that has real ramifications because it tells me that there's a ticking clock in Biden's head too. As we get closer to November of this year, he is going to desperately need that voting block here. And if it comes down to his reelection or supporting Israel, I think he's going to end up going in this. Of course, that's a double-edged sword we could talk about separately. But when you look on the battlefield, Israel has just announced that they're pulling 5 brigades off the front lines of reservists because they're again having problems domestically with people saying, hey, we just can't stay these guys on the battlefield forever. You're telling me it's going to be months, but we have jobs, we have families, etc. And so what that's going to do, that moving off, means this is going to take even longer. And the longer things go, and especially with these casualties keep piling up, there's going to be the risk of losing more support in the West. And at some point, there could get a tipping point. How do you see this playing out?
So the Bush, that's a Freudian slip. The Biden administration is actually attempting to split the baby here. They are trying at this point to maintain their domestic tranquility of the bloc who got Biden elected. It's not going to happen, by the way. I mean, Biden's bloc is gone. It doesn't exist. But the way he's doing it, he's upsetting the traditional Jewish voters who vote progressive because he's not supporting the Israelis with sufficient enthusiasm. People see that. And then you see the Hamas caucus and those young kids who all believe that the Israelis are committing genocide and inappropriately conducting offensive operations which result in civilian casualties. And I'm not here to debate those issues. That's not our discussion. But what I do see is that the Biden administration completely blowing any opportunity to retain any of the so-called reference groups that supported him. Kids are gone. I think the kids have recognized, living in their parents' basement ain't that cool, and there's no jobs out there for to go. All these jobs. We're still down 9 million jobs from before the pandemic started. So I don't get, this 14 million new jobs. No, we're to the point of where we're nearly back to where we should be, but we're not there yet. So this whole thing, I think, is screwed up. On the military aspects of this, I think there's more to it than pulling troops out. The next thing that is going to happen, it's already started happening, is the Israelis are going to start taking the war to the Hamas leadership wherever they're at. They just hit, I believe it was killed 4 people. One of them a leader.
Yeah, the deputy in Beirut.
In Beirut today, in Lebanon. So this is the new phase. So yeah, they're going to pull back and Gaza a little bit, but I see them going and introducing themselves face to face to these leaders in third locations, and I think Qatar's not far behind, and it's going to be brutal. I think. And by the way, I'm just going to speak. Maybe your audience ain't going to like this. I don't care. I would go after the leaders too. Look, those folks who direct these things do not share the suffering of their own people. If you really care about Gaza and those knucklehead leaders who run the Hamas guys are sitting in Qatar, having champagne and cigars, I just don't think they're sharing the burden of the people they're expecting to go to their deaths for them. So I don't have any problem with the Israelis going after them if that's what they need to do. But I think, to your point, Danny, they can't indefinitely continue to have high-paced, high-impact offensive operations much past the end of this month. So I think they're going to start winding it down. I think they can do most of their operational objectives by the end of the month. So,
but now even if that happens, and it's almost inevitable at some point it happens, because the power disparity between Israel and Hamas is literally off the charts. You can't even compare it in any capacity. So enough time goes up in, that will be the case. However, as we saw, throughout Afghanistan and Iraq wars, that every time you kill innocent people by whatever means, oftentimes you create more enemies than you had before. And so there is no doubt that even once Israel goes through and completely pacifies the north, and then eventually if they do the same in the south, that then they're going to have to occupy that area to keep it pacified. And of course, then you're going to get the probability of a guerrilla war and an insurgency come up. And that's going to take a lot of troops, a lot of time, or they're going to potentially have more terrorist strikes, even in Israel. How do they navigate this? I mean, what's the outcome here?
So the roadmap that the Israelis plan to follow is the one we used at the end of World War II when they were so ironic here. We're using the word denazification multiple times during this interview. Or I should say Putin used it the first time, but where I'm using it now. So basically they want to examine, and I believe they're looking at. I don't know this for a fact. I'm not involved in negotiations or discussions, but I'm pretty sure that Netanyahu and company are looking at how the United States settled Germany after at the end of World War II. There were rumors and significant potential for werewolves. Matter of fact, there was a group called werewolves, which were the insurgents against the United States, which did not happen. It was something that was kind of a non-story in the end, because the United States was able to come in with an effective civil affairs. By the way, I'm a civil affairs officer as my secondary branch, and civil affairs, I think, is an under appreciated art that actually examines beyond simple military terms what you need to do to work with the population and bring peace. We didn't do it well in Afghanistan, which I think you and I would agree upon, because fundamentally, the nobody ever took the time to understand the Afghan people and to work with them rather than trying to force them into a construct of our choosing regarding Jeffersonian democracy. Just saying. Uh, but if you go and actually examine what's available, what the culture is, and try to match your strengths to the cultural uh, issues which you have to deal with, then I think there's a potential of doing it. I think that the Israelis intend to essentially occupy Gaza. I think they are going to look for an off ramp, potentially other Palestinian people to come in eventually to replace them. But there's no way they're going to actually allow for uh, a, uh, a Gaza Strip that would permit the infection of Hamas to reemerge. And
Yeah, yeah, I'm certain of that. At least Hamas as per se as it
right.
exists. The issue is that something's got to provide for it. Now we had on a guest in a previous show here a former Palestinian negotiator who definitely is. I don't want to say pro-Israel, but he is pro. Let's find a solution to bring peace for all the people.
That'd be great.
And he made this comment which really stood out to me. That kind of along the lines you're talking about. I mean, this whole Germany after World War II thing. He said the people have to have hope that there is a reason to go down this path here. And I think that's one thing that I haven't seen a lot of on the Israeli side, that I think that for their safety and security, they're going to have to find it after whatever they finish this. They're considered the primary tactical phase. They're going to have to do something to give these people reason to hope, or I don't think they're going to get that outcome.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons they've lowered the blockade of shipping. Basically, one of the things that was announced over the last 48 hours was that the Israelis are going to permit more ships to come in from Malta, from other parts of the Mediterranean directly into Gaza. Right now, most supplies are trickling in, and I'm quoting from an article I read on this last night, trickling in from the Egyptian side. So the Egyptian access point does not provide adequate and sustainable access to all of the needs of the Palestinian people. I get it. So I think the Israelis get that as well. So I think it was a good sign that as part of this change of tactics that they're going to open up the blockade. Now that's actually incurring more risk for the Israelis when you think about it, Danny. I mean, you're not going to be able to control every event, every ship that comes in. But again, the Israelis are saying, yeah, we're gonna lower this. So I think that's a good sign.
So what do you think, just putting on your prognosticator hat, best guess on the second day of the year, where do you think this is, say, by the summer?
I think I just say by the end of January. I think by 1 February, you're going to see an end of primary combat operations, offensive operations by the Israeli army. I think they'll have secured what they want by then. I think they're going to move in with our equivalent of civil operations forces, civil affairs forces, and start working. Between February and March, you're going to see essentially a rooting out of what's left of the Hamas leadership, with a semi persistent occupation by the Israeli military. I think you're going to see the
Do you have
Israeli
a sense of
military.
how big that force would have to be on a perpetual basis for an occupation of that size of a strip?
I think it's going to take about 100,000 troops. And they've got 500,000 in call-ups right now. So I think they can do it. But the question becomes, how do you do it in such a way to give people hope that you don't see these people as the Gestapo? So that's going to be the issue. And I think that's where they're going to have to work through it. And I think by June, You're going to see a plan in place to remove the IDF folks and replace them with some level of either Arab or internally created Palestinian military force to go in and relieve the Israelis.
That's an interesting idea, but that seems it would have at least some plausibility for hope that would give.
Well, if I was in charge, that's what I would do.
Well, maybe you will be by then. Who knows? Maybe Biden's watching this. He's looking for a point man. But anyway, I don't know if you take it. Separate issue. Okay, switching gears. Let's go to the Asia region, the Indo-Pacific area. So the couple of things. There's both some issues with China, Taiwan, and now North Korea, South Korea, which has kind of popped up again. It's reared its ugly head of potential problems. First of all, I want to look at the China side here. You had Xi Jinping in a New Year's speech, like many of the leaders did, where he kind of laid out his thoughts. But watch this second half of this short clip, because it also shows some of his concerns, which could mitigate against the possibility of war breaking out this year. Roll that, Gary.
Now, he also spoke in broad terms on China's role in the world. He talked about wanting to build a community with a shared vision, and he said peace and development remain the way ahead. But on the issue of Taiwan, he was a lot more specific. He said Taiwan and China will, quote, surely be reunified, unquote. But what was most unusual in his New Year address is that he spoke specifically about the challenges that China faced.
有风有雨是常态.
We are bound to encounter headwinds. Some enterprises had a tough time. Some people had difficulty finding jobs and meeting basic needs. Some places were hit by floods, typhoons, earthquakes, or other natural disasters.
The fact that he's mentioned this in his New Year address shows how seriously the government is viewing China's economic slowdown.
So there's two issues involved. First is just the military balance. Can China invade and successfully defeat Taiwan? And there's various views on that. But then there's the bigger issue, I think, is that diplomatically and economically, can China afford to do that? Because if you get into a fight that drags out 2 years, like this one that Russia's fighting right now, doesn't go quickly as they had hoped, it's going to be a hard time for them to maintain their economic base. And without economic power, you can't maintain military power. So how do you see China and Taiwan shaking out over, say, the next 6 months?
Well, first off, I'm offended by the reporter that she kept calling me Shirley. Don't call me Shirley. Just, Bob Hayes is watching. I'm going to send this to Bob, by the way. Bob's going to see this from airplane. Hey, Bob, just saying hey to you. Anyway, so back to the topic. First off, there's no indication, Danny, that the Chinese are contemplating direct military action. We would have seen this from afar from a long time. And even if they planned on doing it, they would have done several rehearsals by now. Not to say they're going to not jump in and do things to be provocative to the Taiwanese. But I think it's inevitable that you're going to see a lot more political messaging right now, starting I think next week is the Taiwanese national elections. There's a great deal of controversy, right? So there's a great deal of controversy going to be coming up with those elections, because there are multiple parties. One of them is a pro PRC China party, which they say they're not. Well, we're not really pro, but we are. So I don't think anybody who's rational would believe that any real military conflict would be productive. Even Xi, I don't think would see that. And to that point, a protracted military conflict of any nature in that region would upset the global economy in ways I don't think we fully understand.
Yeah, it'd be catastrophic.
Something like between 80 and 90% of the global chips that go into cars, just everyday cars, is manufactured. They are the foundry, Danny, for most chips. High performance chips, I think about between 28 to 30% of high performance chips are made there too. And there's no replacement for this stuff. The global economy, the global thirst for new vehicles, to include, those EVs, you still can't make EVs without computer chips, just saying. So I think that would be catastrophic in ways that nobody who's rational would want that, even Xi. So I do believe that Xi's ultimate objective has not changed. He has said to Biden to his face, he said it in his New Year's speech, that he sees it as quote unquote inevitable that the Taiwan will be returned to be within the sphere of China, whatever term you care to use of art. But I don't think it's in the cards at any time soon that the Chinese CCP PRC are going to use military force to achieve that objective.
And do you think that it would matter which of those three candidates? Because there's a pro-democratic one, there's a pro-Russian one, a pro-Chinese one, and then kind of an independent, which is a third party. There's never had one that's actually going to be that was potentially could win. So this is a first for them as well.
Yeah.
But do you think that it matters? Because I've heard one expert from Taiwan say it doesn't really matter. That it's the same issues either way. Do you see any difference in that?
No, I think most. I've never been there, so I have to be careful about how I term how people should weigh my opinion. So be aware that I've never been there. I've not had a tremendous amount of interface. I've met Taiwanese officers. I spoke with them, but without direct knowledge of the political environment like I'd like to have before I make an assessment. I don't think I believe that the pro-independent candidate will probably do the best because most of Taiwan now sees them as Taiwanese, not Chinese. I think
Right.
it's the way the country's matured. They have a very strong self-identity. That identity is rooted in effective global commerce. That global commerce is their coin of the realm. And by the way, even the Chinese depend upon them, Danny,
Yeah, I think the same.
for their
Yeah.
technology. So nobody in their right mind wants to interfere with that. And I think it's very much aspirational. I don't think Xi is quite as far down the road as Victoria Nuland thinking a miracle is going to happen and the Taiwanese are all going to cave. But I do believe that
So
there's
how do you match that up with some of the statements we hear from some of the admirals in the Pacific region in the last, say, 18 months or so that said, oh man, war's coming 2025, 2028, somewhere around there. They think he's going to take the move to do that. Is that just posturing to get more cash for the Pacific fleets, or do you think that there's any reality to that?
It's deterrence, Danny. It's the language of deterrence. One of the things I know some of these folks, and I understand some of the folks who are advising them. The idea is, even with Biden in charge, the belief. I'm not the guy in charge of the policy. I'm just saying what I believe the policy is based on what I've been told. Is to make sure to the Chinese, the CCP, PRC understand there will be a real price to pay for aggressive action. Several nations have said they do not feel comfortable with the Chinese expansion of the military. That's not me, that's them. Philippines, South Korea, Japan, Australia. I've been on Australian TV talking about this, Danny, because the Australians have seen the CCP as a potential economic threat, especially if the CCP is able to dominate the Pacific Rim, which is what they said they want to do.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, Danny, does the stated objective and aspirations of the CCP's PRC to dominate the Pacific Rim become actionable within the context of their current military growth? That's the issue. I don't know of any military, any country that builds up a military to a massive scale who never uses it. I don't. Even we used ours in Desert Storm. It wasn't for the Cold War, but we ended up using it. So I don't know of any country, any superpower who's ever built up incessantly and not used their military in some form. So I'm very concerned.
Just probably not in 24.
I think that I don't think in 24. I don't think the Chinese are there yet. I don't think they have internal confidence. They're doing some things that our Navy's worried about. They're launching, I think, their second or third aircraft carrier.
Yeah,
they're doing some things to create force projection. Now, I'm not here. You and I have had this discussion in person. I'm not a big believer that we should be everywhere all the time. You know, the United States has power all over the planet. I think that sometimes antagonizes folks. They misinterpret it. I don't think we intend to use it, but people are very uncomfortable with it. So the more you expose yourself to the potential of an adversarial threat, the more you're going to get hit. You know, that's one of the things we talked about. Why do you have all these forces all over the place? So,
I was
anyway,
going to go to the North Korea stuff. I'm going to go ahead and pass that off because we're running low on time here, and I want to get to the last section here, which is the U.S. domestic issue here, because you know we have sent, like I said a second ago, 5,000 combat vehicles of various types to Ukraine, millions
Right.
of shells. We're now sending lots of stuff, missiles and artillery shells to Israel. We're
Yeah.
trying to send even more stuff yet to Taiwan to give them even
Yeah.
more here. And the question is going to come, financially, can we handle all that? Number two, our defense industrial base is not able to replace all that stuff. It'll be many years right now if we stopped giving everything away before we could replenish our own stocks here, and we haven't stopped giving things away to people. So the question is, to what extent do we weaken our own capacity to defend our interest by getting involved in too many things, sort of to the point you just made?
So, I believe in an effective defense, not an expensive defense. And if I were the Secretary of Defense, I would actually go through and literally reduce the defense budget by $1 billion because it's that overblown. And we are a muscle bound giant. We spend so much money on useless things. I mean, think about what we just talked about earlier, $113 billion. Do you know how many veterans you could have helped with $113 billion, Danny? Do you know how many cities we could have actually just built houses for people and live in? You don't know
Yeah.
worried about homeless. You could build them a whole new city outside the city. That's how insane the spending is right now. There's no regard to the effects of overwhelming and sustained blind spending. Throwing money has never worked anytime it's ever been done, no matter how you do it. So I think there should be a grand strategy. You and I have talked about this. I've tried to convince my generals that I know and I'm trying to convince the Trump folks coming up in the next administration. You have to do a grand strategy. Why do you have a military? What do you plan on doing with the military? What do you want it to achieve? And then those things which are not linked to it. By the way, I get this from the
First you
Reagan
get
guys.
that, then you
Reagan
go
did
about it.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reagan did this back in the 80s, and then he actually cut the defense budget once he reached the specific goal of the grand strategy. Think about that. When's the last time we actually had a president cut a defense budget? Not since Reagan. So this is not Democrat or Republican. This is just ignorance. And the fact is, we need to examine the budget for what is necessary and important, not because McDonnell Douglas and Boeing want extra money for their yachts.
Yeah, well, Gary, I'm going to throw you a quick curveball here before we shut down, because that may be what you hope coming. But we had Secretary of State Blinken, who was saying, "Hey, war's not all that bad because it's got some good domestic issues here." And Gary, if you can find that and toss it up there.
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. It builds our own defense industrial base. So in many ways, this is a win-win for us.
So you see, man, they're like saying, no, we don't need to cut spending. We don't. In fact, let's spend more because, wow, that makes money here. And as long as the wars keep going, that's why so many people want to keep supporting these things. And they don't look at the strategic thing. They don't look at whether it's in our national security interest. They see it's in our financial interest, or at least their financial interest.
Why do you think, Danny, all these four-star generals go onto the boards of Boeing and Lockheed Martin and all these other things? Come on. We all know why. So the bottom line is we have a system that is not serving the American people relating to defense spending. And the Ukraine thing should have been a big wake-up call for a lot of folks, and it hasn't been. So it's very disappointing. But Blinken's correct. This is a way that members of Congress and the administration can go about trying to pay off their big donors. And they do a very good job of it. And that's what they're doing. So there you go.
So for them, it is a win-win.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, just lots of people die, but well, that's unfortunate, regrettable, as they say. But
look, I over the holiday, I rewatched Failsafe. And people ought to rewatch that movie. There's a lot of truth in that movie about how things can get out of control. And I think it's people need to check that out because we allow the defense industry and the momentum of our unaccountable policies to take a course that I don't think most Americans will fully understand or appreciate. So,
yeah, and you know what? And for my view on 2024 here, I think the biggest thing I worry about is something I don't have any shots or clips to show because it hasn't happened yet. And I just kind of, something in my gut tells me that there's going to be some sort of significant black swan event that occurs in some realm. It could be a number of things that could have all kinds of unintended consequences and rebounds and reflections throughout the rest of our country and our economy and our national security that could make this a pretty tough year. And if we don't get some pretty good leadership up in there, as you kind of mentioned ago, I think it's going to be, we could have some tough year, but
it's going to be a tough year. It's going to be a tough year for the high school debating team in charge of national security. That's for sure.
Yeah, that makes it harder, as you say. But when those things start to come out, we're going to look forward to having you to give us some good analysis on what the meaning of all this is and what we should do to get out of it. But thank you for coming on today, Tony. And as always, we remain unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, the hard things, whether people like to hear them or not. We try to mimic you on the hard truth here on this show, and we're grateful for your show. Everybody, be sure to watch Tony on the Hard Truth on his podcast there, because you got a lot more stuff like this coming out there. Great to see you, Tony, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Thanks.